After 30 years of marriage, I thought I'd held our family together. Until the day I found out. My husband had a 31-year-old secret son. I said nothing. I quietly gathered the evidence and waited. At the family gathering, I exposed everything. They spent decades putting on a show. I only needed 1 minute to bring the whole performance crashing down. My name is Margaret Brooks. I'm a grandmother, a mother, and today I turned 60. Coincidentally, it's also the first day of 3rd grade for my grandson Mason. That evening, Mason came home from school and my son Brian brought back a cake. I'd spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen, preparing a big family dinner. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, baked mac and cheese, a fresh garden salad. Every dish was something they all loved. Once my husband, Harold, and my daughter-in-law, Melissa, got home from work, the whole family sat down around the dining table. Melissa smiled as she looked over the spread and turned to Mason. "You'd better thank Grandma," she said cheerfully. "She made all this just for your back-to-school celebration." But Harold's face darkened. He frowned and snapped at me. "You cooked all this and didn't even think to get some wine?" Brian quickly stepped in to smooth things over. "Dad, let's not start tonight, okay?" he said, placing the cake in the center of the table and tearing off the packaging with a smile. "Come on, let's do cake and candles first." Harold's comment stung a little, but seeing the grin on Brian's face helped ease the bitterness in my chest. I joined him in opening the cake box. But the moment the lid came off, I froze. The cake read, "Congratulations, Mason." That was it. No balloons, no candles with my name, no hint of a birthday message. Just those few words. I leaned in, hoping I'd missed something. But no, that was all there was. I'd really thought Brian would remember this year. I'd even reminded him just a few days ago. Told him again that my birthday was the same day as Mason's school milestone. I told him I was hoping for a proper celebration this time, to feel seen, to feel remembered. But here we were again. Forgotten. Brian noticed my pause and called out, "Mom, what are you doing? Where's the lighter? Help me find it so Mason can make a wish." Harold barked from the other end of the table. "Did you go deaf? He asked you to grab the lighter. What are you standing there for?" I swallowed the ache in my chest and forced a smile. "Brian," I said softly, "aside from Mason's big day, do you remember what else today is?" He furrowed his brow, confused. "What do you mean, Mom?" Harold growled again. "She's always gotta make things complicated. Just get the damn lighter." I glanced at Mason, then said nothing more. There was no use turning this into a scene. Not in front of the kids. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed the lighter and handed it to Brian, watching him light the candles. Everyone else at the table was laughing and chatting, celebrating. Everyone except me. Dinner had barely started when Mason's fork slipped off the table. Melissa turned to me immediately, but Brian and Harold were still deep in conversation, completely unaware. Mason twisted around in his seat and shouted, "Grandma, I dropped my fork. Go get me another one." For the first time, I didn't spring to my feet. I stayed seated, my tone calm. "Mason, you can do that yourself." Mason frowned and kicked at his mother's chair. "Mom, Grandma won't get my fork." Melissa gently tried to calm him down, then turned to me with a sweet smile and raised her voice a little. "Margaret, where do you keep the extra silverware? I'll grab one for him." Harold shot me a glare the second she spoke. "Go get him a fork." Brian reached out to stop Melissa, casually brushing it off. "Mom will take care of it. You don't need to." I stood up, but I didn't head to the kitchen. Instead, I walked straight into my bedroom and began packing my clothes and gathering my bank statements. The money in those bank statements came from the food stall I ran. All these years, Harold contributed little to this family. His paycheck was modest to begin with, and whatever he earned mostly disappeared at poker nights with his buddies. Barely anything ever made it home. After Brian was born, I stopped working. With no one around to help with childcare, I became a full-time mom. But Harold always complained I spent too much, as if every dollar I used was a burden to him. After hearing it one too many times, I stopped asking him for money altogether. Instead, I set up a little food stall at the local farmer's market. I was good with my hands and even better with people. The stall did surprisingly well. Over time, I managed to save up a decent sum. To be honest, back then I already thought about leaving him. But I didn't. I was afraid Brian would grow up in a broken home. I didn't want him to suffer because of us. So I stayed quiet, kept my head down and carried on. I've spent my whole life putting others first. Growing up, I was the obedient child. The way I was raised taught me that divorce was shameful, that it would ruin a woman's reputation, hurt the family, and worst of all, scar the children. So I endured. I endured Harold's drunken tantrums. I endured my mother-in-law's endless criticism. I told myself I had to hold on, for Brian, for the sake of giving him a whole family. And so I did. For 30 years. But how many 30 years does a person get in a lifetime? I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes, grabbed my suitcase and stepped back into the living room, still echoing with laughter as if nothing had happened. Mason already had a new set of silverware in his hands. Melissa must have gone to the kitchen and gotten it for him. The moment I walked in, she glanced at me with a cold, dismissive look, then lowered her eyes and continued eating like I wasn't even there. Harold was downing a glass of whiskey in one gulp. The bottle was new. Brian had just gone out to buy it from the liquor store next door, a little treat for his father. Watching that scene made my heart sink even deeper. I've always hated alcohol. When Harold drinks, he becomes someone else. Loud, violent, reckless. He smashes things, yells at everyone, sometimes even disappears for days without a word. And every time it's me left picking up the pieces. Over the years, everything I'd scrimped and saved to furnish this house. The furniture, the appliances, the little comforts I worked so hard for, he's destroyed one drunken rampage at a time. Each shattered object was a punch to my gut. And yet Brian knows exactly what his father turns into when he's drunk. He's seen it. So why does he keep buying him alcohol? Maybe ever since he moved into that big 3-bedroom house I bought for him in that nice suburban neighborhood, he's forgotten what it's like to live under the same roof as a drunk. Or maybe he never really understood it to begin with, because he was never the one left behind to clean up the wreckage. Or maybe he's just a coward. Too afraid of Harold's temper to stand up to him, so he plays along and lets me be the scapegoat. I stood by their dining table, eyes locked on Harold. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice steady. "I've had enough of this life." The room fell silent. Just moments ago it had been filled with laughter. Now it was cut clean like a blade through air. Harold exploded first. He slammed his glass down and looked like he was about to flip the entire table. But after a quick glance at Melissa and Mason, he forced himself to stop, though his voice roared through the room. "Have you lost your mind? You're nearly 70 and you want a divorce now?" Brian jumped up too. "Mom, what are you talking about? We're all just trying to enjoy dinner here. Why ruin everything?" Melissa clutched Mason, her expression unreadable, watching the scene unfold like it was nothing more than entertainment. I let out a quiet laugh, cold and hollow. So this is what it's come to, decades in this house, and I'm still the most dispensable one in it. "I'll be staying at a hotel tonight," I said calmly. "Tomorrow morning, you're coming with me to sign the divorce papers." Harold's face twisted with rage. "I'm not agreeing to this. Are you insane? You want to tear this family apart? Aren't you ashamed of what people will say?" Brian chimed in immediately, siding with him. "Dad's right. Come on, Mom, you're both too old for this. What would people think if you split up now?" Harold, seeing Brian take his side, smugly poured himself another drink and knocked it back like a king on his throne. That arrogant, dismissive look on his face made my chest tighten with fury. I almost couldn't hold it in. I came within inches of grabbing that glass and throwing it in his face. Brian must have seen the fire in my eyes. He hurried to intervene. "Mom, you're not seriously doing this just because Dad had a few drinks tonight, are you? Look, I'll stay here tonight and keep an eye on him. If he acts out, I'll handle it. Let's just finish dinner, all right? Whatever's bothering you, we'll fix it. Just don't bring up divorce again." Anything but that. Anything but that. That's all my son has ever offered. Empty reassurances, hollow promises. Never once has he truly stood up for me. I gave him a faint, bitter smile. "Brian, tell me something. Do you even remember what day my birthday is?" He froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. Of course he didn't remember. Not since he got married. Not once. I've grown used to being forgotten. But today, I'm done pretending it doesn't hurt. I'm done trying to please everyone. Done sacrificing myself for a family that never saw me. At 60, with nothing but a terminal diagnosis giving me 6 months to live, I finally understand. If I don't live for myself now, when will I ever? I left them behind without another word, dragging my suitcase toward the door. That's when Melissa suddenly stepped in front of me, pulling Mason with her like a human shield. Margaret, come on, she said gently, her voice soft and polished as ever, a pleasant smile still pinned to her lips. We're family. Every family has its little rough patches. Why don't we just sit down and talk things through? Then she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper by my ear. Didn't we agree not to bring up divorce again? I immediately stepped back, putting distance between us. Well, I've changed my mind. Is that a problem? After I divorce Harold, I don't want any of you contacting me again. This time I meant it. I was done. I wasn't just leaving Harold, I was cutting ties with every last one of them. What do you mean, none of us? Brian's voice rang out as he jumped up, rushing over to block the doorway. Mom, what the hell is going on? What do you mean you changed your mind? Changed your mind about what? Exactly what it sounds like, I said calmly. If you're struggling to understand, maybe your wife can explain it to you. Now step aside, I'm leaving. I nudged the suitcase forward, signaling them to move. Margaret, you can't just walk out. Melissa suddenly grabbed me, clutching my arm as tears began to stream down her face, like a perfectly timed performance. What about Mason? Who's going to look after him now? What about his dinners? Are you really okay with him eating fast food every night? What if he gets sick? Don't you care? He's your grandson, the one you raised, your precious little boy. Can you really walk away from him? Her words were carefully chosen, delivered with the perfect mix of emotion and manipulation. But to me it was all absurd. So absurd I couldn't help but laugh coldly. Seeing that, Melissa seemed to think she'd struck a chord. She kept going, her voice sweet and coaxing. You care about him, don't you, Margaret? And honestly, Brian and I need you. We really do. If it weren't for you keeping the house in order, taking care of Mason, handling everything behind the scenes. Well, let's be honest, Brian's not exactly a natural homemaker. She glanced over at Brian with a smile, then leaned in again, whispering, you know, every time my mom visits, she always praises Brian for being such a responsible husband. She tells me I married the right man. She chuckled softly. Of course, she doesn't know that it's all you. You're the one holding everything together. You've given Brian a good reputation, and I know that must feel good, right? When people praise him, deep down they're really praising you. And besides, have you said enough? I cut her off, my voice sharp and icy. Can you just shut up already? Melissa froze, stunned like she was seeing a different person for the first time. What are you staring at? I snapped. Never seen me angry before? What do you mean, what about Mason? Isn't he your son? Isn't it your responsibility to raise him? And you can't live without me? You're both in your 30s, what, still not weaned? Now get your hands off me. I've watched you play this perfect daughter-in-law act for years. Aren't you tired? Because I sure as hell am. Starting today I'm done. I'm no one's mother, no one's grandmother, and definitely no one's wife. From now on I live for me. Move. When she still didn't let go, I shoved her aside. Mason saw me push his mom and immediately lunged forward, giving me a hard shove in return. Grandma, how dare you touch my mom? Do it again and see what happens. Brian rushed in to shield Melissa, then turned on me, his voice shaking with rage. Mom, you've crossed the line. You need to apologize to my wife. Harold stood up too, joining the chorus of outrage. The three of them closed in, yelling, accusing, crying. Chaos filled the room like an explosion. And yet, somehow, I still hadn't expected it to hurt this much. I'd always known what kind of people they were, deep down. But seeing them bare their true faces like this, seeing just how quickly love could turn into judgment and blame, still brought tears to my eyes. These were the people I had spent my whole life caring for. All I wanted was a divorce. All I wanted was to live for myself just once. Why did that have to be so hard? If you won't let me walk away in peace, then fine. No one gets to walk away untouched. You like putting on a show? Then I'll give you one. Let's see how well you all perform when every ugly secret is dragged into the light. Alright, everyone, calm down. I'll apologize. I turned toward Melissa and gave a small, polite bow. I'm sorry, Melissa. I shouldn't have pushed you. I apologize for my behavior. She froze, clearly thrown off by my sudden shift. But she recovered quickly, casting a quick glance at Brian before offering me a teary smile. It's okay. I'm not upset. I looked at Brian and Mason, my tone even. What do you think? Was my apology good enough? Do I deserve forgiveness? Mason gave a small nod, saying nothing. Brian looked awkward. Mom, it's just an apology, no need to be so formal. I nodded slightly. So then, would you agree when someone does something wrong they should apologize? Mason nodded again. Brian hesitated this time. His eyes flicked toward Melissa as if searching for a cue before finally nodding. Yeah, of course. If you do something wrong, you should apologize. Good. I let out a cold laugh. That's all I needed to hear. I grabbed my suitcase and shoved it aside near the door, then turned and calmly walked back into the living room. I pulled a chair over and sat down right in the center of the chaos. Now, I said coolly, let's talk about your father. Brian frowned, confused. Melissa's expression shifted instantly, nervous and guarded. Harold looked like someone had yanked the floor out from under him. Did you know, I said, cutting straight to the point, your father has another family? The words landed like a hammer. Harold shot up from his seat, grabbing my arm in a panic. His voice was loud, angry, and trembling. What the hell are you talking about? Are you out of your mind saying this in front of the kids? Dad, let her finish, Brian said firmly, stepping between us, surprisingly taking my side for once. Harold's face turned red. Brian, she's making things up. You know what kind of man I am. I yanked my arm free and stepped back. Am I making